Hello everyone and welcome back to Curious Kellen. Today I'm going to be talking about the brothers Karamazov and Crime and Punishment and why you should read them. So both of these books were written by the Russian author Fyodor Dostoevsky. He was alive in the 1800s and he published a lot of his work in the late 1800s. You probably recognize Crime and Punishment. If you haven't read it, you likely have seen the title or have heard something about it. It is a classic in literature, very well known. Brothers Karamazov isn't as well known, but for Dostoevsky fans, it is quite known. So I want to start by talking about Crime and Punishment. And Crime and Punishment is kind of the go-to for Fyodor Dostoevsky because everybody knows about it. It's one of these main classics of literature, and it's a really important novel in the sense of the topics that it covers for the time that it was written in. And this book is mainly about a man who goes and kills someone, and he gets away with it in terms of the law, and he's trying to figure out if he can get away with it psychologically. Can he handle having killed someone and getting away with it? So it's very philosophical, but it also has a lot of interesting narrative. There's really one main story that takes you through the whole book, unlike Brothers Karamazov, which I'll get to in just a second. So it has some philosophical content, but it's mostly narrative driven, in my opinion, when compared to Brothers Karamazov. And Brothers Karamazov is about three brothers, obviously, Brothers Karamazov, three brothers and their father, and their relationships between each other, as well as their relationships with their friends, their relationships with God and religion. So, in my opinion, Brothers Karamazov is more philosophical than Crime and Punishment. In terms of the content that it covers, it considers religion more, and the relationships between the brothers bring up some interesting concepts. And so yeah, the story in this is mostly there is a lot of narrative that happens, but a lot of what goes on is kind of an exploration of philosophy and kind of going through concepts in that way. And because if you read this, there's some chapters in here that are very standalone chapters that are more about philosophy than the actual story that's taken place. So definitely a little bit heavier subject, a little deeper in Brothers Karamazov. So which one do you actually need to read? Obviously, if you have the time, read both of them. And if you do have the time to read both of them, I would recommend reading them in this order: Crime and Punishment first, and then Brothers Karamazov. As I said, Brothers Karamazov goes a lot deeper than Crime and Punishment. So if you start with Crime and Punishment, it's going to kind of set you up for when you get to Brothers Karamazov. There's a lot in Crime and Punishment that is mirrored in Brothers Karamazov. So if you start with Crime and Punishment, you'll kind of get almost a little bit of a warm-up for Brothers Karamazov. I actually read it the opposite direction. I read Brothers Karamazov first, and because I read it and liked it so much, I wanted to read Crime and Punishment, because it's another well-known Fyodor Dostoevsky novel. So, and when I did that, because this book was a little bit deeper than this, I wasn't as fulfilled with this as I was with this. So I think it's a lot better to go from Crime and Punishment to Brothers Karamazov, just because, you know, this is a deeper exploration, and this one doesn't go quite as deep. So it, you know, you feel a lot more. It kind of progresses more going from here to here than the other way around. Now, if you only have time to read one, you're going to have to take some things into consideration. Things like, do you enjoy reading books that are a little bit faster, a little more narrative driven, or books that are a little bit more philosophical, go a little bit deeper? If you're someone who enjoys a narrative, somebody who enjoys a shorter book, something a little bit easier to follow, something maybe a little more exciting and engaging, I would recommend reading Crime and Punishment, because it like I said, it's very narrative driven and it has a lot of action in it, especially at the beginning. And also it's a little bit more, they're a little bit different in the sense of where they take place, because this takes place in St. Petersburg in Russia, and this book takes place in kind of a smaller town. So if you're looking kind of for the more modern Russian life, well, not really modern because it was written quite a while ago, but modern Russian life for the time that it was written, then this is a really great option. Now, if you're looking for something that goes a little bit deeper, that studies more philosophy, that goes that brings forth a lot of thinking to do, then I would highly recommend Brothers Karamazov. There are a lot of short side stories that happen in this book, and it may seem like they're not important at the time that you're reading them, but at the end everything kind of comes together and you understand how important everything was in all the side stories. And so if you're looking for a book that maybe doesn't take you in such a straight path like this one does, I would recommend this, because there's just so much knowledge in these pages that you can really start to get kind of a new perspective on life and understand, religion more, and understand relationships more with this book than with Crime and Punishment. So if you're looking to take maybe a little bit deeper approach to Fyodor Dostoevsky, I would recommend reading Brothers Karamazov. Now, for my favorite book, I would say Brothers Karamazov is my favorite of the two. They're both really good, but I would say Brothers Karamazov is better because of the amount of knowledge that can be had from this. It's very deep, very thoughtful, and I just really enjoyed reading it. I read it in my high school 10th grade English class, and I think having my teacher there to guide us along and provide insight was really helpful. So shout out to my 10th grade English teacher if you're watching. His insights were really important for reading this book. So I think that could be a little bit of a bias there, because I was able to have someone to bounce ideas off of and discuss with other students with this book. And with this one, I read it on my own, not in school, so I wasn't able to really talk with too many people about it, but it's still a great book nonetheless. So the last things I want to touch on that have to do with both of these books that aren't really specific to one or the other is just how you're going to be reading them. You really want to make sure that you're reading not to look cool, if that makes sense. You shouldn't be reading Crime and Punishment just so that you can say, oh, I've read Crime and Punishment. You really want to read these books so that you can understand the knowledge and information that they contain, and read them because you want to read them and because they have really interesting stories, not because you want to be able to say, I've read Crime and Punishment. Although that can be a part of it. So make sure that you're reading these because you want to read them. Also, make sure that you plan out your reading for these books. They are long. They are long books. So, if you really are wanting to get through them and you have kind of a busier schedule, plan out goals. Brothers Karamazov is broken down into 12 different books. So, maybe you want to read one after your first 2 weeks of reading, you want to have finished book one. So goals like that you're making sure that you're reaching them. Maybe you want to read 30 minutes every day, an hour every day, whatever it is, make sure that you're reaching your goals with reading this, because, and especially with Brothers Karamazov, there's a lot of introduction that is really important later in the story, but when you're in the thick of it, it can seem really kind of mundane. So make sure that you're setting those goals so that you actually get through it, because once you get to the middle of this book, everything starts to pick up. There's interesting things going on. It gets really exciting, but the first little part of this book takes some guts to get through. So make sure that you plan out your reading for both of these books, whether you're giving yourself a schedule, goals to, for the amount of time you want to read every day, every week, whatever that may be, make sure you're planning out your reading. The last thing you want to do is you want to be able to take into account the ideas that you're actually reading about. These aren't just stories. They have some really interesting philosophical aspects to them. So take time not only to read these, but also to consider what you're reading about. Consider the concepts that you're reading in these books. And you can do that through book clubs, by having discussions with other people. You can do that by keeping a journal and writing down your thoughts that you're thinking of while you're reading these. You can do that just by, reading a chapter and then just sitting there with yourself, kind of almost meditating a little bit on the concepts that you just read about. And that is really important for these two books because of the content that they go over. So make sure that you're actually taking the time to consider what you're reading and why it's important, instead of just reading through the story and getting to the end and going, oh, that was a good story. You want to be able to actually get the information out of them. So that's all there really is to it for the differences between Crime and Punishment and Brothers Karamazov. They're both really good books. I highly recommend reading both of them. If you have the time, do Crime and Punishment first and then Brothers Karamazov. They flow into each other really nicely. If you have read either of these books or any other Dostoevsky books, any other Russian literature, I would love to hear about it. I actually read Alexander Pushkin's The Little Tragedies, and that was really good. Alexander Pushkin is considered to be one of the greatest Russian writers of all time. Fyodor Dostoevsky alludes to him a lot in his books. So if you've read any other Russian literature, or even just whatever book you're reading right now, whatever your favorite book is, I would love to hear about it in the comments below. So please make sure to let me know about that. Thank you everyone for watching. I really hope you learned something new. Stay curious, and I will see you in the next video.